time.
Gotta make a big entrance, chill.
We're between the devil and the dark again, still breathing, so we call it a win. Got the void ahead and hell behind, just one more jump and we're back in line. Yeah, we ride that edge where the lost ones spark. Between the devil and the dark, battle past in the engine light, laughing at surviving one more night. Stars still burning, danger still stark. Living our lives between the devil and the dark. I guess the drinks are on me again.
Greetings, YouTube. This is Brandon Hill, half of our little duo of me and Terrence Pegasus. Thank you for coming on to our Read Aloud. For those of you who will be joining me at a later point or watching the video from the beginning. So what we're going to be doing in the week leading up to the release of our newest book, Twisted Faith, coming out on the 23rd, is I'm going to be doing some Read Alouds. From our first two books, the re-releases of them, as a matter of fact. So I'm going to be reading them since they're only available right now on ebook. Reading them off of my little Kindle here, kind of hard to see. That is our first book, Between the Devil and the Dark, and you can get yours available on Kindle as well. Do believe I have the link down in did-we-do. I'll make sure to check to make sure I put it up there. I do believe I did, but I do sometimes forget when it comes to the non-main live streams that Terry and I do. But you can go to Amazon, just look up Wild Space Saga, Brandon Hill, and you'll find all the books. And like I said, the first two books right now, they have them available, the new versions on Kindle, but not quite yet on paperback, at least not here in the States. Terry did say that they were available in the UK. Lucky guy. Okay, so before I begin, just want to kind of give a couple little caveats here. First of all, this is just sort of a reading off the cuff. I'm gonna probably have a lot of sputters or stops or maybe flub the words from time to time. So please forgive me. I'm gonna try to read it as best I can. Usually pretty good at reading these types of things aloud. Also, these books are very much rated PG-13, so there are some swear words. So don't like kids listening to this, then probably might not want them to be listening to this. So until that point, I'm going to go ahead and get started on this end. Thank you for joining us, Byron. And it's going to be a nonstop hour-long read aloud. And by the time the hour is done, I'll probably go ahead and grind everything to a halt. My hope here is to whet your appetites, see if some of y'all might be interested in actually checking out the books. So we're just going to fire everything up and go ahead and get started. Turn this down just a touch. All right. So here we go. So this is book one, Between the Devil and the Dark, by Brandon Hill and Terrence Pegasus. Prologue. Agent 4 watched as the recording began. Lines of static and interference resolved into an image resembling the black void of space, perhaps moments after a ship had shunted out of a hyperspace corridor. But the death-like serenity quickly broke as the image seemed to self-adjust for brightness, revealing an orb that was more of a deep, dark, roiling gray than absolute black, just slightly brighter than the surrounding cosmos. Flashes of lightning sparked across its surface, illuminating the incredibly dense cloud cover like the night side of a gas giant. The designation appeared at the image's bottom left side. Imperialis Ithel Mission Time Z plus 240517, Unit NZ72124. From the planet's surface, black points began to appear, bursting from the cloud cover. Were they ships? If they were ships, they were unlike any humanity had ever seen. They were more like skeletal manta rays of some kind, organic in appearance, as if they were grown rather than built. They rose from the roiling clouds of the planet's surface, at first in hundreds, then in the thousands, like supersized masses of birds in a twilight frenzy of motion. Came a roiling black entity of a different kind. Long, shifting tentacles pulsed nauseatingly with the motions of titanic, aberrant life, reminiscent of worms erupting from turned earth. The image magnified, revealing tangled, pulsing knots in as much clarity as the darkness could muster. It became clear that they weren't quite tentacles. Were these robots? Vines, maybe? No tentacles had such a bark-like cover. More ships abruptly appeared in the void, belonging to a more recognizable armada. Hundreds of warships, destroyers, and carriers of the Second Imperium, all tearing out of hyperspace with their characteristic scintillating flash. Some only to be torn to shreds by the gathering swarm, which moved like shoals of herring in the oceans of Columbus, and didn't attack with any kinds of weapons. Rather, they proved to be the weapon, ripping through the Imperial ship's armor like millions of darts through paper. But they were not immune to taking their own lumps from the armada, as good a number met their own end by ion cannons that disintegrated swaths out of the black manta ray swarm. There were no explosions, however, as the ships were merely transformed into eerily glittering space dust. The pace of the battle went on like this, and quickly dissolved into a sight of combined ferocity and desperation as both sides attempted to swallow each other whole. Even the mortally wounded vessels, masticated from the inside out by the shoaling swarm, refused to relent, dropping troop carriers to the planet's pulsing surface as the unholy carnage of battle subsumed the void above. Then everything shifted to an entirely different battle, chaos of a separate, more personal nature. The image was a camera feed from the helmet of an Imperial tank, a lone soldier amidst her company of hundreds, image enhancements compensating for the violent shaking as she ran through the battlefield. A twisted, shifting nightmare of a landscape composed of a shifting forest of the massive tentacle-like vines that changed the surroundings from second to second. Jakartan battle language filled the comms as the commanding officers amongst the army of tanks screamed their orders to their sisters. A vine the size of a skyscraper shot up in front of the soldier, its fuliginous surface bearing blister-like protuberances that exploded into spider-like abominations that seemed to bear a frightening array of bladed weapons and bludgeons of every imaginable kind, all descending upon the soldier and her company in a rain of death. Hitting the surface of the shifting tentacles, they crawled with alacrity speed toward the line of soldiers. Orders rang through the comms and mag bolts tore through the rain, ripping some into pieces while the final screams of other soldiers screeched over the comms. The bearer of the camera tore through the wave of death with frightening precision, but the company was outnumbered in a way that even their weapons could not handle. The creatures closed in, and the soldier discarded her rifle in favor of a large combat knife, and the prodigious close combat skills of an Imperial tank set to work, dismantling as many of the horrors as she could. A blow to the head cracked the lens of the camera, and the image turned upside down as the damaged helmet was discarded, giving only a moment upon its landing to reveal the camera's former bearer standing toe-to-toe with something that was frighteningly and unmistakably alien in all senses of the word. It stood like a man, a being of black chitinous armor that exuded a smoke-like anti-radiance, its head a mass of interlocking plates beneath which a mass of glassy serrated teeth formed a permanent macabre grin set into a bony jaw that tapered to a spear-like point at its chin. It towered above the human component of the battle, standing on armored legs with feet that curved into monstrous black talons. Its arms flowed into a pair of long, jagged blades that seemed to emit a faint amber glow. And unlike the abominations that overran the company, it walked slowly amidst the sea of death, as if it were death embodied, willing to take its time. The soldier bore her vajra, a polearm with mimetic steel rings that formed into blades, a determined grimace upon her gray-skinned face as she parried the patient slashes that the humanoid had delivered with surprising speed and agility for its size. She dodged some of its blows, but then screamed in pain as the humanoid moved with sudden inhuman speed. Its claws having bored shallow wounds in her body, it then backed away, inviting another attack from the soldier. It was playing with her. The point was made all the clearer as the short fight went on. The humanoid showed no damage from any attack the tank could deliver, and soon her body was a mass of wounds, with blood seeping through her armor. She weakened, her strikes now barely connecting, then staggered. As if finally bored with the fight, the creature swung a bladed arm back and ran the soldier through, lifting her now dead and impaled body off the ground. Holding the limp form close to a pass for its face, it appeared to sniff the corpse, then let out a low growl. Then with a roar, it tossed the body into the mass of abominations that swarmed around it. A sea of blades enveloped it like a piranha feeding frenzy. As the monster charged out of view, a chime broke his concentration. With his finger, Agent 4 reached out and paused the video feed, then stood as he always did, expressionless, eyes hidden behind a pair of sunglasses. Then he stepped back, taking a moment to process all that he had just seen, shuddering from his attention having been violently shifted back to the here and now. My God, he whispered, coming out of his shell of emotional detachment. From the backwash of disconcertment and disgust, he managed to muster enough coherent thought to be thankful that he'd had the presence of mind to set the file to delete the playback as he watched it. There was no sense in having himself as well as the entire chain of his sundry sources involved in cobbling this together summarily executed. Every last second cobbled together from multiple transmissions and multiple perspectives had been highly classified, after all, for eyes far above his pay grade. The chime sounded again, his summons to a briefing by his superiors. He was needed. Ford could sense the universe was changing. Stealing a glance out of the ship's observation deck on his way, he noticed the undeniable signs, the increasing number of capital ships and platoons of soldiers filling the imperial barracks and garrisons, and now, God help him, he knew why. And worse, he knew that humanoid figure, or at least something like it. It was the key. War was coming. Although if the footage was to be believed on the far-flung reaches of the Imperium, one was already here. This was only the tip of a massive iceberg, one that went back at least 2 decades. 2 decades of decisions that became ever more extreme. Of course, there was little that he, much less Nemesis, could do about it. Both he and the one he cared for were mere cogs in the Imperial machine, expendable at a moment's whim, a fact that took him years to discover and even longer to accept. Ford kept his poker face decorum as he entered the communication room and stepped up to the dais. He waited for the biometric scans to finish, giving his spotless black suit an unnecessary dust-off. In a moment, the hologram before him changed, a blank void featuring the words, "Decoding interstellar relay signal to Icona. Please wait." Switched to the face of Agent 2. Behind his superior, a red-orange sunset silhouetted against Icona's ocean of skyscrapers and towering arcologies that compose the capital of Bistron. "You've been activated." His words, direct and curt, were as inflectionless as his appearance was bland and nondescript, a trait of the agent's. Aside from his slender build and longer brown hair, he wore the same black 3-piece suit and glasses as Ford. "Sabrina Prime, infiltration and retrieval of assets." "Who's the mark?" Ford asked. The hologram of a young man appeared adjacent to the image of 2. A person of medium build wearing a blue aviator's jacket over a blue-gray turtleneck, dark blue jeans, and worn-looking black military boots. His face had a slightly narrow but square jawline, large mischievous-looking eyes that were a darker shade of green than his own, and a thick crown of black hair that seemed to be in a perpetually windblown state. His wide mouth was set in a grin that hinted at a sense of cockiness. Below, a straight line of beard led to his chin where it fanned out into a dark, sparse stubble. Beneath his left eye was a tattoo of 2 vertical parallelograms connected at the top by a diagonal line, the left one longer and set lower than the right. "A pirate," Ford remarked, immediately recognizing the tattoo pattern. He narrowed his eyes, unseen by Agent 2 behind their shades. "Not just any pirate," 2 shook his head. "He is Xerxes Paraska, the maternal first cousin of Pirate King Irid." "What's he doing on Sabrina?" "Working as a gestalt pilot for the G1 Leagues," 2 replied. "Intelligence says he's earned himself quite a reputation." After hearing the ping of a finished download, Ford skimmed over the information that appeared on the console in front of him. 5-time ranking in the G1 finals, 2-time champion, happily married to a Mandela refugee, Crew members, human and itinerant Felian techies. He's high profile. Won't he be missed? That's why you've been chosen for this retrieval. The ghost of a smile appeared on the edge of Agent Two's thin lips. Both you and your partner, that is. I'm confident that you will figure out how to handle it. After a moment's gamble with his better judgment, Four at last decided to ask the question that had been standing at the edge of his lips. Exactly why do you need him? After seeing his superior's raised eyebrow, he quickly added, if you don't mind my asking. After all, his being so popular is bound to make for some difficulties. You can't blame my curiosity. Political destabilization, Two answered after a somewhat lengthy silence of his own. With an unreadable frown, he seemed to study something off screen before speaking again. The clans of the free trade conglomerate, as the king has grown to call his little kingdom, is becoming too powerful and prying too much into imperial affairs. A production state that renewing efforts to locate Roma and King's Knight might cost us a decade or longer than last expected. All the while, searching for their homeworlds, we'd be wasting time in increasing police actions against pirate raids, a costly enough venture in the long run. This way spares us time and money and gains us political leverage. Two's ensuing silence was abrupt and poignant, and Four inferred that this was all the information he was going to get. It was a good thing, then, that he was good at doing a great deal with very little. Understood, sir, he said. One last thing, Two said before terminating the call. The mission has a secondary conditional mandate, retrieval or destruction of the asset. There was another pregnant pause. Retrieval, however, is preferable. Understood, sir, Four replied again, and the hologram vanished, leaving him with the image of his target, mission data, and his thoughts. Four began to think in earnest afterward, his mind mulling over the latest turn of events as he strode back through the corridors to his quarters. He knew where this flurry of preparation started, a coalescing of several things, all having begun with the ill-advised and, as expected, failed incursion into Felian space. Though ancient history to most, he knew that catastrophic loss of valuable manpower and ships had remained a black eye for the imperial overlords that they had never quite lived down. Now with the Felian Empress having recently given birth and rumors of this newborn daughter slated to be presented as a future governor of a bordering colony between the Empire and Alliance, as a symbolic gesture of strengthening relations, the Imperium had become truly desperate. But where was this mission going to get him, he wondered. This Xerxes Paraska was not only a relative of the royal family, but also very close to them. This was a gamble he would never have made on his own. Not only was this move not connected to the greater concerns afoot, but knowing the Pirate Queen's quickness to anger, there was a good chance that making a hostage of this man would have the opposite effect that his superiors intended. Were it up to him, he would have expended his efforts chasing after the mad doctor who had escaped with her experiments from the now abandoned facility at Artanis. God only knew what mischief she was up to now. He stepped into his quarters where his charge lay on the floor, peacefully disassembling and cleaning her 500 Magnum revolver. He smiled at how peaceful she seemed at the moment, how at peace she seemed at the moment. Not a gray-white skinned tank churned out of the Jakartan creches, but still a living weapon as lethal as any of their combat models, able to pass for human among civilians, currently in a zen-like state. All she needed was orders to once again transform her into death. His charge's golden eyes stared widely at him with childlike innocence. "You're upset," she said as he wiped her hands, then sat down on the couch beside him. "Most find my expressions hard to read," Four said, betraying a sly smile as he removed his shades. "But you know me too well for that, don't you, my dear?" Seeing her gaze unwavering, he sighed, relenting. "Everything troubles me, and it'll trouble me until we can find a way out of our situation." "They'll never let us go," the girl said. "There's always a way out," Four assured her, "and I promise you that someday we'll find our way." He said this knowing that they were monitored. They always were here, but there was nothing to fear. His superiors were confident in the security of the pen they'd constructed. For now, whatever he and his charge had to say about it mattered little. "We were given a mission." It was unclear whether she phrased it as a question or a statement. "Retrieval of a target," Four said. giving a shallow nod as he handed her the data chip. His charge placed it on her palm, curling her fingers about it as she closed her eyes, the nanos in her body forming a circuit to feed her the data through her skin. After several seconds, she opened her palm, a confused expression on her face. This seems insignificant, she said. No strategic value. That's what I said, Four replied. Nevertheless, orders are orders. Nemesis nodded, her expression fading into stoic resignation. Any way the wind blows. Chapter 1. Planet Saburna Prime, Pittown District. The man interviewing Xerx on the StellarNet sports broadcast was a conventionally handsome virtual persona speaking with the renowned champion in an outdoor venue in full view of the Million Man Stadium, one of the colony's most recognizable landmarks, towering above Saburna Prime's pristine skyline. So, this will be your fifth time making it to the G1 finals, am I right? The interviewer asked. Won the championship in my second year, Xerx said with a nod. Definitely an achievement for the records, the interviewer remarked. Your gestalt is certainly impressive and lives up to her name. Imani is Swahili for faith, right? It was Neela's idea. Xerx betrayed a self-effacing grin. She had faith in me from the beginning when we started refurbishing on her. She looks like an antique. The image switched to a full pan of the Titanic armored fighting machine. Its overlapping armor plating possessed an almost feminine curvature to its form, with multiple sensors lining the sides of its head in a vertical formation below a knife-like horn that projected from its center. We think she might be, Xerx said, his expression momentarily sobering into a wistful smile. She was a gift from my dad. Well, I think he'd be proud to see you have done so well with her. Well, behind every good gestalt is an even better team, Xerx said. Absolutely necessary for one-time winner, the interviewer said. It's going to be two-time, Xerx answered, his bravado returning in full as he brought a glass of what appeared to be whiskey to his mouth. Well then, we're not short on confidence, I see, the interviewer made a very automatic-sounding laugh at his quip. Yeah, you've got your work cut out for you, though your team barely made it against our summation in the last fight. Yeah, it was a real nail-biter, wasn't it, Xerx said. But what matters is the win in the end. Wasn't that a depleted uranium round, though? The interviewer said as the image switched to a slow-motion take of two Titanic machines engaged in a grappling match. Almost quicker than his eye could catch, one shoved the other back, then subsequently shoved its opposing arm forward. The camera seemed to stutter as several of the already wrecked buildings collapsed with a speed reminiscent of an invisible hydraulic press on fast forward. We thought it tore right through your cockpit. Not even close. The image switched back to the cocky pirate as he gave a dismissive wave, but it did almost pierce the reactor. And that's what they didn't tell you. Looks like you shook it off, though, like a Sunday morning hangover. That you did, the interviewer said, his tone matching Xerx's enthusiasm. And then, using that shrapnel you picked up from the collapsed building, you took out Ursa's reactor. It was like you knew it was there. Yeah, my wife has great insight, Xerx said. She's got eyes in the back of her head and probably on top. On that note, could you tell us more about your team? The interviewer said as the camera switched to a photograph. In addition to Xerx, there were 3 Thalian techies, 2 human-like Ankia, and 1 towering shaggy Harakia, and 2 women, Mandela refugees, his wife with a long braid from an otherwise bald head, standing hand in hand with him and resting her arm on his shoulder. The other, noticeably shorter, had short hair with braids and wore a nervous smile as she stood by the Ankia Thalian with darker hair. Behind them was a mechanized foot the size of a 2-story building. Salt and Pepper are probably the best tech experts I could have found, Xerx said with pride. They butt heads a lot, but Var keeps them in line. The guy's also surprisingly good with medical stuff. It wasn't until I met him that I didn't know the Harakia Thalians have a talent for that. And then there's Mabala. She's got implants like my wife and can run diagnostics like she was a computer herself. She'd probably be interchangeable with Neela in the co-pilot booth, but Neela can keep her cool just a bit better. But in the hangar bay, she and Pepper complement each other like mac and cheese. You know, Neela said, her voice cutting into Xerx's video feed, we'd probably have more us time if you turn off the news holos with your interview. Xerx paused the broadcast and shut it off, feeling rightfully self-conscious. I just want to hear how it went, he protested. I watched earlier. It's corny, but well done. Corny? Only a little, Neela said. I think that came from you. Very funny, Zerk said flatly, returning to his attention to the work at hand. Still, I'm kind of regretting that we left the rest of the crew in orbit. He allowed a faint groan to into the calm at his wrist. Okay. He allowed a faint groan into the calm at his wrist. He had forgotten how tedious, not to mention uncomfortable, maintenance work could be. Years ago, he would have felt at home perched on the shoulder of any gestalt, but now every ache reminded him of how acutely out of practice he was. And in spite of the harness, he began to develop an increasingly nauseating awareness of the sheer 50-meter drop down to the hangar floor. You were the one who was so eager to get the Reckless's main engines online, Kipenzi, his wife reminded him, her musical laugh coming from her console at the hangar's far end of the room. The hangar's far end hidden from sight by Imani's massive form. And all things considered, it was a good decision. He just bought the ancient First Imperial warship out of storage on the far side of Saberna's greater moon a month ago, and had only undergone a handful of shakedown runs. I thought we'd have some us time then, Zerx replied as he clambered up the hill-like lobstered steel plates of Imani's right shoulder, using the hoist control wand to take out the slack from the harness and hasten his movements. After all, when was the last time we got time away from the crew? Last year? His wife laughed softly. Such are the sacrifices of a champion. As for the romantic thought, I blow you a kiss. It doesn't go that far. Zerx laughed loudly, refocusing his attention on his work. Yeah, I didn't think this one through, I guess. Thought this job would go a lot faster than it's been. Oh! He yanked at the lifted seam on an armor plate, but it wouldn't budge. Pressing his feet against an adjacent purchase, he pulled with all his strength. Slowly, it slid the rest of the way with an echoing groan. Zerx tapped into his control pad and, after diverting the power feed, depolarized the massive nanogel that locked the wiring in place. He then moved the blue-gray rectangular paneling to the side, holding it in place with a magnetic bolt before he went to probing the massive cables that protruded from the exposed muscle fibers. A series of green lights blinked on his pad, indicating a high bandwidth data link with Neela's console. Now we're in business, Zerk said with a note of satisfaction. Neela's voice sounded much less sanguine. Have you even worked with a climber before? Zerk snorted. I've worked with plenty of climbers in my day. I'll have you know I was fixing gestalts long before we first met. Neela said with a click of her tongue. You said you worked with climbers. That means you didn't work as a climber. It wasn't my primary job, Zerk at last admitted with defeat. I'm your wife, Neela said. It's not wise to try to tell me half the truth. Besides, you know there's a reason why climbers are Orphellian. Not all of them, he protested while watching the readouts displayed on his pad shift madly. What about Mabala? She doesn't... Oh! Neela paused for a second as a red warning appeared on Zerx's pad, something that certainly wasn't reflected on his wife's end. Got it. Does a jumper lose on the muscle latency compensator? It must have taken a hit with your last match. Change the subject, Zerx said, setting to work on the area Neela had indicated. You don't have to be a Fellian to be a climber. No, but even you will agree that their agility really helps. The only reason Mabala gets away with it is she's a genius. She'll run a rep job solo, and she does all the calculations on her handheld with no bionics. Zerx's pad flashed blue light, indicating that Neela had set to reprogramming the nanogel. If you would let her stay planet-side, we'd be done by now. She's needed more on the ship, Zerx said, and genius doesn't even cover it. Try savant. At that moment, Zerx thought about the painfully shy girl, wondering if she worked solo because it was more efficient or because she was truly that socially awkward. She needs to learn to live a little, though. Besides, Pepper would never have forgiven me if I left her with... Neela interrupted. That poor boy. You shouldn't get his hopes up. I didn't tell him anything, Zerx protested. It's up to him and you know who if and when that happens. You still don't have to play Cupid's middleman, Neela warned. Mabala is afraid of her own shadow right now. She's lost so much. What better thing to boost her confidence? Zerx countered, undaunted. Where is anyone about how she took the news of Mandela One's annexation? His voice softened. And I had to console you as well, remember? Yes, but that was... Kitege. Zerx stressed the term of endearment with uncharacteristically sincere gentleness. I'm serious. This plan might be good for her and Pepper both. Besides, Issachar did it for us. There was a long pause before Neela replied, her tone reluctant. That's true, but now you owe him a pirate's bounty on some mad scientist's head, Neela countered. Considering what she did to him, I'm not considering what she did to him, not to mention the Fellions, I think that's well deserved, Zerk said. I'd go through hell and back for that man bringing us together, you know. He grinned slyly. Or are you saying that you regret it? Neela's giggle rang over the comm, amplified by the acoustics of the hangar. Oh, my cheeky husband, I will have to make you pay for that later. I look forward to it. Zerk's voice was heavy with expectation. Loudly and abruptly, the door buzzer broke into their conversation. Shit, Zerk hissed. He placed his tools down on the flattest part of the arm's surface he could find and reached for the controls for the hoist. It's all right, Neela said. I'm closer to the elevator. But Zerk had already committed himself, which was probably why he had failed to realize that he pressed the wrong button on the control wand. No sooner than he slid off the edge, he noticed that the hoist was pulling him up instead of down and ultimately suspending him awkwardly head over heels, his leg tangled in a section of the harness, which remained that way for the remainder of his slow descent. Spotting his wife directly below, he scowled at her echoing giggle and amused grin. She idly played with the thick braid that she had woven from the hair that girt the base of her otherwise bald scalp, and then with large brown eyes that sparkled with mischief, watched the machine slowly bring him down to the final few feet. She pressed the stop button on the controls once he was level with her arms and held him in a manner similar to the way he carried her over the threshold of the Reckless's dropship on their wedding day. Very funny, Zerk said as Neela unwrapped the section of the harness from his leg. He then restarted the hoist to bring him the rest of the way down. He cast her a lopsided grin in spite of himself as he set both feet on the ground. He must have wanted to do that for years. I plead my right to silence, Neela purred, touching her nose against his own, a prelude to a kiss that perhaps lingered too long, as the buzzer again sounded, 3 times in a row and far more insistent. Someone's impatient, Zerk commented, eliciting an amused snort from his wife. Go ahead, I have the rest. Neela hurried off to the main office door at the far end of the hangar bay while Zerk unbuckled himself, taking care not to become tangled in yet another embarrassing way. It was slow going, but he managed to at least wrest himself free from the rigging of cables and clasps. Jeez, wasn't this hard getting into it, he muttered, reaching for his jacket that he left hanging by the edge of a nearby tool rack. He paused to glance upward with a smile at his titanic prize-winning machine. Imani resembled a knight in full armor, its panels forming geometric patterns that glinted in the hangar's harsh overhead lights. A relic of the Imperium Wars of centuries ago, she was truly a work of art, not cobbled together from Deep Space battle remnants, but rather a true refurbished original, and thus worth a small fortune. This had better be important, he thought as he followed Neela's path toward the office. Well, it certainly seemed important. Zerk shuddered inwardly when he noticed the condition of their guest occupying a corner of the desk with Neela, but he forced a smile as he quickened his pace toward the man who sat hugging a mug of coffee as if it were a lover. Gregor, Zerk said, trying to sound upbeat. Their Gestalt team's tool provider was lanky and pale with falls of scraggly, half-gray, dirty brown hair, and was shaking like a leaf. He always looked like he would blow away in a stiff breeze, but he usually carried himself with an air of unflappable confidence. Still, he had never before seemed so shaken. Neela hovered beside him, a look of concern on her face, and most alarmingly, a pistol in her hand. Without a word, she locked eyes with him, then glanced pointedly at the window behind the desk. As he approached the pair, Zerk inspected Gregor's haunted gaze. He thought the mag pistol that Neela had tossed him from the open... He caught the mag pistol that Neela had tossed him from the open weapons cabinet. With a combination of trained hand and reflex, he chambered the ammo rounds and switched off the safety. What's going on here? He asked. He was near to babbling when he came in, Neela said, her voice a low conspiratorial register. But from what I got from it, he says he's being hunted. Gregor then cast a gentle yet clear silencing gesture her way. Thank you, Neela. His voice came in a slightly quavering whisper. He swallowed, then exhaled loudly. But I think I've reached words again. I can explain it. Explain what? Zerk asked. He'd been about to click the safety back in place and slip the gun into the secret holster in the back of his pants, but Gregor grabbed his wrist, stopping him. I wouldn't put that thing away just yet, Gregor said. You're going to need it after what I have to say. Chapter 2. Orsid Expanse, 28 light years from Saburna. Paige looked over Ike's LiDAR display with a dwindling patience. A rarity, her crew would have said, for someone who usually possessed the serenity of a Zen master in combat situations, at least according to her crew. We didn't miss them, did we? She finally asked. Doubtful. Ike rolled his dense shoulders after looking down for so long. The intricate Tomoko tattoo designs on his Maori heritage wove up to his neck and seeming to heave like ocean waves beneath the thin fabric of his tank top. The hollow grid pulsed with little else but debris echoes from the asteroid belt and flotsam from the 2 centuries-old remains of the battle that happened in this otherwise dead section of space. This is ridiculous, Paige said as she shook her head. Those bastards' icon trails live right here. She looked up and spoke to Miranda, who concentrated at the secondary tactical station with stoic passivity. Even now, she did what she did best, outside of being the best sniper she'd ever seen, even as a former soldier in the Alliance. She typed in formulae running simulations since the chase had begun on Saburna at the Badlands outskirts. Miranda, we didn't miss anything, did we? Probability of evasion, 28.3%, Miranda recited without looking up. Tactical probabilities dumping star drive fuel to create ion echoes, 0.03% probability, as if they weren't finished refueling. Chances of prior knowledge of our pursuit, 48.3%. So not likely, Brogan said, translating his crewmate. The giant man stood beside Ike, shaking his head. Maybe the asshole who shot Maria spooked them, Ike said, but Paige shook her head. That was just bad luck, Paige said, then switched on her comm. Okay, love, how's Maria doing? You patched her up? Yeah, I'm just about done, Kyron replied as the hologram appeared before the emitter embedded in the steel of her prosthetic right arm. The Shadow Star's most junior crew member and resident scientist Q Medic was placing various bloodied instruments into a sterilizer tank named Maria, who flexed her bandaged arm with a smile. The giant tank sat on a stool while Artemis, her constant shadow, hovered over her shoulder, her green eyes wide with concern. It was just a flesh wound. I'd have been done sooner, pigtails over there. He gestured casually towards Artemis, who stuck her tongue out at him. Hadn't been in my way. Well, if all's well that ends well, we need our resident skyscraper back on the breach. On my way, Captain, Maria said, rising to her feet. The entire time, Artemis held onto her shoulders. She was lifted off her feet, clinging like a pet. We just saw something, Ike exclaimed, bringing Paige's attention back to the grid. She watched as she fiddled with the controls, with nervous excitement bringing the scan back to a section of the debris field where a distinct ping hit the LiDAR's next sweep. Gotcha, Paige hissed. Pip, locked in and throttle up. Rather than the usual enthusiastic response, an assault of sudden awkward silence met Paige's order. Wondering if her helmsman and hacker had absconded to the restroom, she looked up from the hollow once again toward the helm station where Pip was reclining, her head bobbing to music piped into a pair of headphones clipped to her ears. In the relative quiet of the bridge, the tinny sounds of muffled old earth heavy metal could be heard grinding away into her eardrum. With a frown, Paige accessed her station's remote functions from her wrist controls and shut off the music. The effect was instantaneous as Pip flailed and sat up. Hey, she shouted, furious at first. What's the big... All signs of anger drained from her face as her dark eyes settled on Paige's reproachful gaze. Hey, Captain, Pip said, following her words with a sheepish laugh. Did I miss something? Now that I have your attention, Paige said, can you kindly lock onto the data I sent you and fire up the engine so we can earn our dinner? Oh, found him so soon, Paige said as the hollows erupted about her. Her fingers flew across the controls at near superhuman speed. Picking up the chase, then. Paige switched her attention back to the LiDAR grid and had noticed that the ship's marker had, in response to their movement, begun to move away at alarming speed. Secret's out, it seems, Ike commented as Paige sighed. They always run. she muttered at the seeming futility of the act. Think they're up to something? Ike said. They can't outrun us, at least not in a ship this small. That small. Got him on visual, Pip announced as the bridge's main hollow display switched on. The gaseous clouds of the expanse cast the bridge in a dim, multi-hued pastel glow, with the Raiders' ship at its center, its thrusters burning on full in its ultimately useless attempt to escape. We've got a beat on them now, Paige said, gazing at the massive image with a confident grin. We'll just need to get close enough to use a TIP, and then they'll be dead in the water. Then they're as good as... Holy shit! Paige's squeaking voice broke into her conversation. Paige looked up as the diminutive tank's hollows went red. Prime atomics into the debris field, dead ahead, Captain! Full stop! Paige commanded. Gravity retardation, kill the momentum, fast! The ship gave a sudden lurch. At the exact same time, alarm klaxon sounded on the bridge. Out of the corner of her eye, Paige noticed Maria's massive form slip through the lift entrance, then stagger before clinging onto its edges. To her left, Artemis was with her, nearly childlike in height compared to her, taking a wide-legged stance to steady herself before Maria grabbed her by the waist. Before the Shadow Star captain could mutter another command, the subdued pastels of the main hollow erupted into blinding white. Paige squinted, averting her eyes from the painful glare, amid several surprised vocalizations before the image went dark. She opened her eyes fully, looking away from the now blank hollow and back to the grid, which had also vanished. A slight tremor ran through the ship's hull a few seconds later, but subsided quickly. We're blind, Miranda said matter-of-factly. No shit, Miz, Paige snapped. What gave it away? The bright lights of the hollow is going poof. Relax, Paige. Relax, Pip, Paige said, taking control of the situation. She raised a finger toward the diminutive tank and gestured vaguely downward. Just tell me when we'll have visual again. All right, Pip said, less emotional, but still with a hint of exasperation. Systems coming back online in 3, 2, 1. At the end of the countdown, the hollows flickered back to life, revealing a sight that made Paige's insides flare with combined fury and dismay. Damn it, she hissed at the sight that greeted her. The Raider's ship slipping away into a hyperspace corridor. Damn it! Ike leaped back and she slammed her fist into the hollow console, shattering the image and its source in a shower of sparks and circuitry. A biting miasma of ozone and burnt plastics erupted into the air as Maria came up behind her. Moments later, Artemis followed, carrying a fire extinguisher which she used to douse the flame that had burst from the crushed instrument. Paige, her rage still unsated, spun around and reached for the extinguisher, but Artemis dodged her grasp and slipped behind Maria, leaving only her half-full final cup of coffee, which she put to its final rest in the midst of her rage. It shattered on the floor of the bridge as the captain leaned forward on the railing, squeezing handprints into its steel with her prosthetic arms. Guess there are no refills where that came from, Brogan said, coming up from behind her. It was that lame joke that shattered her anger. With little else to be done, Paige laughed, actually feeling better. No, Jay, apparently not, she said, running a hand through the half of her hair that she let grow long over her cybernetic right eye. We were close, weren't we? Maria asked. Yeah, Paige drawled. We were. She then raised her voice. No chance anyone could trace the destination of that hyperspace conduit. Radioactive interference, Miranda said. Result, a 0.03% probability of sensor restoration before the closing of the tesseract. Meaning the visual was the only thing we had before the other systems kicked back in, Pip translated. By the time everything else was available, they were gonzo. And you have more bad news, don't you? Paige said, noticing how Pip's face held that particular look that she tended to have when things went horribly tits up, and she wasn't sure whether to tell her immediately or wait until later. Well, would this be a bad time to let you know that the Queen just called for a sit rep? Of course she did. Paige threw her hands into the air. Wonderful timing, that one. Jay, take the bridge. I'll call her royal pain in my ass from the office. They're after me, Gregor said. Who's after you? Zerx asked. His former employees. Mila was still glancing furtively out the nearby window. Or at least he thinks that's it. I hope you're not calling me a liar, Gregor said, sounding stricken. Never. Zerx frowned, confused at how Gregor could be worried about something that was, as far as he knew, ancient history. But you haven't heard from MTHI in over a decade. He watched the scraggly looking man gaze drifting back to the black contents of his mug, and chasing my ass all over the colonies before well, the people who got me out managed to shake them. Again, a decade ago, Zerk said, his tone somewhat less patient. But Gregor continued undaunted. I thought I was careful, you know. I didn't always look like a reject from the space hippie fleet, but when the Mercs stowed me away here, I got me some surgery that even bounty hunters couldn't see through. I thought they'd given up. I thought I wasn't that valuable to them. And only now you think someone ratted you out? Zerx found himself stifling his urge to pistol whip the man. Gregor shrugged. Maybe someone's got good eyes, or maybe a Thelian or a hybrid I worked with caught my scent. How should I know? Zerx, thankful that Neela could pick up on his growing annoyance, came to the window beside her, trying to put some distance between himself and Gregor. Outside, their massive transport truck was parked under the street lamp's harsh light. Half a mile away was the tarmac where the dropship to the Reckless was parked, alongside the hangars for the other teams and their gestalts. He saw no suspicious movement, but that didn't exactly mean anything. Were they close by? His wife asked, changing the subject. I think I lost them in the storage sheds around my shop, Gregor said. Whoever they weren't all that skilled. Or maybe they intentionally led you here, Zerx remarked. And you're sure they're from your old employer? Neela asked. Who else could they be? Gregor looked almost insulted. Gregor, Gregor, you know that MTHI doesn't do anything half-assed, Neela reminded him. If they wanted to, we wouldn't be able to stop them. Gregor took a larger swallow of the coffee, grimacing as if he drank something more akin to the more rancid homemade kombuchas from the bazaar. Shaking it off, he looked at Neela with bleary eyes that seemed to at last grasp what she was suggesting. Wait, you're saying that these guys aren't from my old company? She's probably right, Zerx answered, shoving back his urge to huff out of frustration. Gregor was a good person, but fear often drove him to forge these chains of irrational logic. However, this sequence of events did awaken a concern of his own. Look, if they wanted you that badly, you'd already be tranked and halfway to Dorado. Halfway to Dorado in a crate aboard the Shadow Star, most likely, Neela interjected. Zerx nodded. Yeah, Paige doesn't fuck around with stuff like that. Paige and her crew were MTHI's gophers who always got their pound of flesh. Then who the hell's after me, if not them? Gregor said. Someone with a lot of data on you in order to make it look legit, Zerx replied. Perhaps 5 someone's, Neela said, all wearing diffraction cloth? Shit! Gregor sputtered, standing bolt upright, practically kicking the chair away from the table. He staggered to the side and backed up toward the wall. Then, with a sound metallic thud, slumped to the floor, unconscious. Neela, who had been keeping an eye on their encroaching guests, turned away from the window, staring, startled at the noise. What happened to him? She asked, seeing Gregor's motionless form. Hit his head on the weapons safe. Zerx gestured to the sturdy locker directly above the spot where their friend had collapsed. Probably for the best, though. At least one problem solved itself. They're just standing up there now, Neela said, returning her attention to the outside. Got a bad feeling, Zerx said. This is too convenient. Do you believe Gregor now? Neela asked, confused. No, but it's not the only factor here, Zerx replied. And it's kind of funny you mentioned it a few minutes ago. Last year when Isbar visited, he told me he was closing in on, well, her. Wait, her? Neela said, casting one more furtive glance outside. But she wouldn't know you're here. And even if she did, she's left you alone for years. For years, my cousin was following a cold trail, Zerk said. And from what he told me, this person has a thing for being proactive. Yes, but you have no way of knowing. You're right, Zerk said. I don't. But it's a bit more plausible than Gregor's cockamamie story. Not by much, Neela said, sounding unconvinced. Well, our guests, whoever sent them, don't look like they're going anywhere. Should we at least entertain them? Kind of messed up on that. Not by much, Neela said, sounding unconvinced. Well, our guests, whoever sent them, don't look like they were going anywhere. Should we at least entertain them? I can take them all, Zerk said, conceding to his wife's skepticism. He decided to put a pin in the theory for now as he unclasped his strap to his holster on the second pistol he kept on his thigh. Neela fixed him with a worried look. Kinsey, I don't think that is a good idea, she said. You're cute when you worry. Zerk fixed his wife with a sweet look as he returned the weapons locker and punched in the combination. He then removed an EM grenade along with a launcher extension. Besides, I'm out of practice. At least let me get to the ship, Neela said. She nodded towards Gregor. Will he be okay? He'll be fine, Zerk gave a carefree smile. Now, here's the plan. I'll provide a distraction, you make for the grasshopper. Neela scowled. That isn't very comforting. Wasn't meant to be. Zerk discreetly slid open the window, then shoved the grenade into the launcher's barrel. But I'll be careful. He paused, then addressed the building's AI. Kana, kill the lights. The sight of Neela approaching him was the last thing that Zerk saw before the room was shrouded in darkness, followed by a quick and gentle press of her lips upon his own. When are you ever careful? No choice but to believe me, though. No, I guess not. He heard her sigh as he peered through the window and took careful aim, then cursed under his breath. He could see the distortions, but lacked his wife's more trained eye to tell where one ended and the other began. Are they still just standing there? There was a pause as he waited for Neela to study the situation. Finally, she answered, Yes, seems like they're waiting for us to make the first move. Good. Do your stuff and I'll do mine. He heard her footsteps as she jogged off, followed by the closing of the office door. He then proceeded to count. He couldn't number their guests, but the grenade and his short-range EM pulse would fix that very quickly. 8, 9, 10. He pulled the trigger. In hindsight, Zerk wished he hadn't peeked out the window just before the EM blast hit. It worked as planned. The diffraction cloth's light distortion fell away like fragments of a hologram, leaving the company visible. The entire assembly looking like ninjas in burqas. However, the electrical flash had been bright enough to momentarily blur his vision. He staggered out to the door and let fly with his gun, but only nailed two by his reckoning before he could dive behind the nearby power box. A sparse hail of mag rounds flew over his head, and he tossed the magnesium flare he pilfered from the office their way. As he hoped, the company scattered, thinking it was an explosive, and Zerk fled to the opposite direction, regretting not having counted their numbers. A block down the road and counting proved to be a moot point as distortions of more camouflaged assailants dove off the rooftops. Zerk blindly fired multiple mag rounds at the distortions, taking advantage of their sudden arrival to catch them off guard. It seemed to work for only one. He believed he saw them crumble to the ground, but the cloth's light-bending qualities made it impossible to be sure. He found himself again diving for cover from another volley of mag rounds, some of which just missed him as he took a chance and sprinted away, making an abrupt 90-degree turn down into a nearby narrow alley. It was a service alley between stores, long with multiple piled crates for cover, and its width made for a good bottleneck to take out any pursuers. But after making considerable distance, his heartbeat slowed and he became more aware of the lack of sound. Diffraction cloth didn't muffle sound, and there was little else but the sound of spider crickets singing to break the dead silence. In the dead center of the alley, Zerk's fear gave way to confusion, and then he took a more strategic stock of his surroundings. The opposite end of the alley seemed to lead to an open court, the perfect place for an ambush if his pursuers chose to take an alternate route to cut him off. Probably not a good idea, then, Zerk thought. He glanced back the way he came. Where to go now? A horrible thought nearly stopped his heart. Neela, he whispered in a choked voice. Had they abandoned their pursuit for her instead? He would never forgive himself if that was the case. His mind racing, he quickly made a plan. With questionable routes both ahead and behind, there was nowhere else to go but up. He then leaped atop a nearby air conditioning unit that had reached the eaves of the building and pulled himself up to the low rooftop. Gaining his footing, Zerk waited, listening for any sounds of pursuit. But even atop the corrugated steel and stone rooftops that composed Pit Town, the warm night was clear and just as silent. This is crazy, he at last murmured aloud. Where the hell did they all go? Holstering his pistols, he oriented himself towards his team's hangar in the G1 yards, which towered over the rooftops. The Supremacy of God Adinkra symbol that composed Team Imani's logo was spray painted prominently upon its massive rolling door. On a flat-out run, it would be 5 minutes to the tarmac from the hangar, then leaping from rooftop to rooftop, even leaping from rooftop to rooftop. Fear for his wife overrode the questionable logic of his plan, and he set off back the way he came, speeding toward the location of the Grasshopper, praying under his breath that Neela had managed to get the vessel airborne before anyone could reach her. Funny how everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. The old saying reverberated in Xerxes' head after the smart blow to his side, which sent him flying to the ground and skidding halfway across the rooftop. A harsh force from invisible hands attempted to restrain him as he ground to a halt, but he forced them away, giving himself enough time to draw his knife. As the diffraction cloth depowered, he pressed the blade against the neck of his assailant, female, he guessed by the slight stature. It was too dark to make out any secondary sexual characteristics, but he could definitely feel the blade that she pressed against his neck in turn. Something on the assailant's body glinted in the faint light of the 3 moons, partially hidden by the cloak, but not well enough. Silver as the ambient light, the insignia's appearance was unmistakable. A curving C shape with an end like an open-mouthed serpent, about to swallow a large circle, and a smaller one on the outside of its tail end. Imperials, Xerx wheezed. Chapter 3. The call was waiting for Paige when she slipped into the desk chair in her office. Being the kind of girl who liked to remain in the thick of things, she seldom used it, relegating it only for rare moments to think or private comms like this impending chinwag with the Pirate Queen. Aside from the high-end wood paneling and a multi-tiered shelf with hard copies of books on mercenary and interstellar law, the entire place still retained its sense of plush leather mixed with fresh wood and carpeting. Doubtless Alexa would be less than thrilled about their quarry having given them the proverbial slip, but it wasn't like either one of them had expected these raiders to not have a few rabbits in their hats. Ancient debris fields left ample opportunities for that. She accepted the transmission, and the hollow appeared above her desk, spanning its entire length. In the middle stood Alexa, the Pirate Queen and Duchess of King's Knight, a woman of copper skin, voluminous fiery red hair, and striking blue eyes. She was beautiful in an almost predatory way, and yet in a manner that made her irresistible to most men, and some women. The emerald green scales that ran down her shoulders, neck, and back were visible above the cravat-style collar of her unusually ostentatious and anachronistic uniform of a red jacket that squeezed across her breasts, along with a pair of black leather pants and boots. The ensemble was draped beneath a crimson cloak several shades darker than her hair. On her right stood Indira, her tank bodyguard, in more subdued colors of gray and black, matching the monochrome gray-white of her skin. She wore a more modern and tactical set of apparel in her imperial-style armor, but refitted in a color scheme similar to the Queen's clothing. Finally, to her left was Arshosha, a Felian hybrid of dull brown fur and nearly black stripes, and eyes of a green similar to the Queen's scales. The captain of the Laughing Cat and the most loyal to the Queen in the pirate navy, she was dressed always in her own anachronistically pirate-like attire of a red long coat with gold edges and tall knee-high black boots. At her left hip sat a silver rapier, upon the pommel of which rested her hand, which was sheathed in white leather gloves. Well, I didn't know this call would be this formal, Paige said. Are you overdressed for this, or am I underdressed? Alexa rolled her eyes, assuming a much more relaxed stance. This, along with her own quip, made Paige feel slightly less nervous about the bad news she would have to give. Don't get me fucking started on this bullshit, the Pirate Queen said with a grimace. Reed has a smooth session going on with the Council of the Fleets, and some of them take the term pirate a bit literally. Then she switched her voice down a few octaves, affecting a fair approximation of her husband's tone and accent, while making clearly mocking expression. Dress formal, honey. We need to make a good impression. On the bright side, you two should have a rare evening together, Paige said, offering some silver lining to the beleaguered-looking queen. She'd been initially taken aback by Alexa's foul language, having momentarily forgotten that while in public, Alexa main- maintained a formal and well-spoken tone. That facade collapsed in private, and she could swear better than any sailor. It's about the only thing. It's about the only thing good thing to come out of this. Alexa replied with a wan smile, then squeezed the front of the obviously too tight jacket. I mean, look at this kettle. This jacket is too bloody tight. I'm worried Matilda's going to rebel and make a break for it at any moment. Paige gave a brief laugh. Ha! Wouldn't that be a sight? Well, your rebellious moves aside, Paige said, switching to a more serious tone as she sat straighter. I'm assuming you didn't call me to complain about your attire. Your attire. Weren't that simple, Alexa said dryly. But no, I need an update on the hunt. I didn't think it was that urgent. Neither did I, Alexa said, until the council started complaining that it's taking too long to suppress the insurgents. Well, it's not like they're going to come crawling out of every asteroid and sensor shadow and turn themselves in, Paige said. Again, weren't that simple, Alexa said. When terrorist cronies scattered off like space roaches after Reed and I took back the throne, a fact the damn council doesn't seem to understand. Well, Paige drawled, they're going to have a bit more bad news, I'm afraid. Alexa clicked her tongue. I knew that last one seemed too easy for a reason. She then held up a hand. Not that I'm doubting your crew. Raiders are notoriously cagey. Another thing the council fails to see. Maybe I should stick a few of them on the Wraith for a hunt, and then they know how to get off my ass. We were close to getting the Red Wolf, Paige explained, but they used a nuke snare to blind us in a debris field in the Ost Expanse. Systems took a few seconds too long to reboot, and we only got to see them slip out into hyperspace. Oh shit. Indeed. Slippery old bastards, Alexa said. And I'll need to put in a new expenses form for a monitor as well as a new porcelain coffee mug, Paige added. The thing is that those cheap-ass bean counters at MTHI will be more concerned about the sorting mug. Alexa was quiet for about a minute, tapping her lower lip with a long, red, polished claw before speaking. I didn't suppose you have their ion trail, do you? I wish, Paige replied with a snort. The nukes are left too much shit in the area for Pip to glean anything indistinct. She gave a shrug along with a deeply apologetic look. I'm sorry, love. Looks like we're back to square one, I'm afraid. Alexa, silent once more, at last cast her gaze down to the floor, moving her hands to her hips, the two other women flanking her, looking as helpless as she appeared. No, it's fine, she said at last. Those fuckers have always been good at evading capture, and to be fair, we're only one ship. She then clasped her hands and gave a carefree wink at Paige. We'll find a way to spin this into a positive, don't worry, just stay on the case. You're doing fine. I'll have some ears to the ground and get them to transmit some likely locations of possible bolt holes for Red. Do whatever you can to stay on him. It's a fucking nuisance, and it would help our cause massively if we can just take him out of the game. Thanks, Lex, Paige said, still not feeling particularly good about the bad news she had to give, but feeling somewhat better at how well the Pirate Queen had taken it. On the bright side, Pip's been taking the liberty of dropping beacons at some of the local stables' hyperspace junctions. Hopefully we'll get a ping off if they blast by one. Sounds promising, Alexa said, then suddenly turned away. What? She said, speaking to someone out of the frame. Tell them to be fucking patient. I'll be with them momentarily. She then switched her attention back to Paige, rolling her eyes. Seems like diplomatic duties call, sweetie. Bunch of vultures, if you ask me. Stay on it, and I'll speak soon. The hollow vanished, and Paige leaned back in her chair, hoping that something might turn up quickly. Well, everyone, it's been an hour, and I hope you enjoyed this. Those who decided to flit in and flit out. I wasn't exactly looking at the counter. I know we've got two people up here, and hopefully after the fact, we'll have more people looking at this. And so this was an hour-long read aloud from Between the Devil and the Dark. That's book 1 of Wild Space Saga. Let me pull up the picture again right quick of the cover. And you can get this on Amazon and where other books are sold. Right now, we only have the the ebook ready. We'll be letting everybody know when the book is ready in paperback. I know that our publisher was saying they were having a few bits of trouble, so hoping that'll resolve itself soon. But for those of you who don't mind ebook, hey, it's already ready for you. And I just read a bit of it, and this actually includes some things that we added to the story. And I hope you enjoyed it. It just, flubs and all. Thanks, Byron. And for anyone else that listens to that, hey, if you want to go check it out, like I said, you can find it on Amazon. I do believe we have some links down in the doobly-doo. If not, I'll go ahead and change some things and add those links down below. And so the next one up is going to be Wrath and Redemption. Let me see if I can pull that up right quick. All right. Give me a moment. Okay. And that is Wrath and Redemption, the new cover for it. Again, only available in ebook right now. But I will be reading some chapters from the next book in a couple of days. Going to the doctor tomorrow. Got some health issues that have been kind of scaring me, and I'm hoping it's not too serious. And so when I'll make sure to let y'all know when I'm going to be doing that read aloud. Hopefully, they won't have to keep me at the hospital or not. We'll see. But yeah, and let me see here. Oh, and thanks again, Byron. I'm glad you liked it. And so, so now I'm just kind of hemming and hawing around. So thanks again, once again, everyone, for joining me for this read aloud. I'll let you know when the next read aloud is. And so until then, guys, this is Brandon Hill, half of the author duo for Wild Space Saga. Hoping you'll join us again on the Northwest Passage. Please remember that we have our normal live streams are every Saturday at 3. We hope you join us again for the next one. And if you want to keep in touch, keep joining us. Follow our channel, comment, rate, subscribe, please. We really do appreciate that. And leave some comments down below. We really appreciate those as well. And so until next time, everyone, thank you for joining us on Northwest Passage. Hope you'll join us again. And until that next time, stay lucky and stay blessed. Take care.